Let's be real, consciousness is weird. You're sitting here reading these words, and somehow, in ways nobody fully understands, your brain is turning little black squiggles into meaning. But it's more than that. You're not just processing information like a computer, you're experiencing it. You feel thoughts. You see colors. You hear music. Why? Science has done an incredible job explaining how the brain works. Neurons fire, chemicals flow, signals zip around. But here's the kicker. None of that explains why you have an inner life. Why does tasting chocolate feel like something? Why does pain hurt? Why aren't we just highly advanced robots running on input-output commands without ever experiencing anything at all? This is what philosopher David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness. It's not about how the brain processes information, that's the easy stuff, relatively speaking. It's about why all that processing comes with a conscious experience. And the truth is, nobody really knows. This isn't just a quirky philosophical puzzle, it's a fundamental gap in our understanding of reality. If we can't explain consciousness, then we don't really understand what it means to be human. So let's dive in. Why is the hard problem so hard? Why has science, for all its breakthroughs, completely failed to solve it? And is there any hope we'll ever figure it out? So, what makes consciousness such a hard problem? I mean, we've mapped the brain, tracked neural activity, and even built AI that can beat humans at chess, write essays, and generate art. Yet, nobody can explain why being you actually feels like something. Let's break it down. 1. The what it's like problem. Imagine you're a bat. Stay with me. Bats navigate using echolocation. They see the world by bouncing sound waves off objects. Now, even if we mapped every neuron in a bat's brain, understood how the signals work, and recreated echolocation in a lab, there's still one thing we'd never know. What it's like to actually be a bat. That's the issue. Science can tell us what the brain does, but it can't tell us why it feels like something from the inside. This is what philosopher Thomas Nagel calls the what it's like problem. 2. The explanatory gap. Okay, let's say we have a supercomputer that can perfectly simulate a brain. It processes emotions, sights, sounds, just like a real human brain. But does it experience them? Does it feel love, pain, joy, or fear? Or is it just following algorithms? There's a gap between physical brain activity and subjective experience. Science can describe brain waves and neural pathways, but it doesn't explain why certain patterns of electrical activity create the feeling of happiness or sadness. 3. The why not just robots? Question. Your laptop processes information. Your phone recognizes your voice. AI can chat with you like a person. But none of these things are conscious. They don't feel anything. So here's the wild part. If all intelligence and behavior can, in theory, be reduced to computation, then why are we aware at all? Why aren't we just complex machines with no inner life? Nobody knows. And this is why the hard problem of consciousness is such a nightmare. It's not just tricky, it straight up defies our current scientific framework. And the more you think about it, the weirder it gets. So scientists and philosophers have been throwing theories at this problem like spaghetti at a wall, hoping something sticks. Spoiler alert, nothing really has. Let's go through the biggest ideas people have come up with, and why none of them fully explain consciousness. 1. The brain as a computer theory, functionalism. This one is super popular. The idea that your brain is basically an insanely advanced biological computer. It processes inputs, sensory info, runs computations, thinking, emotions, and spits out outputs, actions, speech, decisions. Sounds solid, right? Here's the problem. Computers process information, but they don't experience anything. Your laptop isn't happy when you Google cute cat pictures. Siri doesn't get annoyed when you ignore her. If consciousness is just computation, then why do we actually feel things instead of just reacting to inputs like a robot? 2. Integrated information theory, IIT. This one, proposed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, says consciousness comes from how much information is integrated in a system. The more connected and complex a network, like your brain, the more conscious it is. Sounds promising, but it has some weird implications. According to IIT, even something like the internet or a thermostat might have a tiny bit of consciousness, which is unsettling. Also, it still doesn't explain why certain patterns of information create an experience. It's like saying, if you connect enough wires, consciousness just happens. But why? No one knows. 3. Global Workspace Theory, GWT. Another take from cognitive scientist Bernard Bars is that consciousness happens when information gets broadcast in the brain like a spotlight on a stage. Basically, thoughts and perceptions pop into awareness when they enter this mental workspace. Okay, cool idea, but here's the issue. It still just describes how information moves around. It doesn't explain why it feels like anything. Imagine a theater where actors pop in and out of the spotlight. That explains attention, but not why there's an audience experiencing the show. 4. Maybe consciousness is just fundamental. Panpsychism. This is one of the more radical ideas. What if consciousness isn't something brains produce? What if it's just built into the universe like space, time, and gravity? This is called panpsychism, and it basically says that everything, even atoms, have a tiny bit of consciousness. Your brain is just a supercharged version of what's already there. Sounds trippy, right? The problem is, this idea is super vague. Like, okay, if atoms have tiny bits of consciousness, how do those bits combine into a full human experience? And if this is true, why don't we see evidence of microconsciousness in simple objects? 5. The philosophical zombie problem. Here's a wild thought experiment. Imagine a being that looks, acts, and talks exactly like you, but has no consciousness. It reacts to things the same way you do. It laughs, cries, loves pizza, but inside, there's nobody home. It's just running on autopilot. Now, if such a zombie could exist, that would mean consciousness isn't necessary for behavior. And if behavior doesn't require consciousness, then why do we have it at all? What's the point? Scientists don't have an answer. So, where does that leave us? All these theories try to explain consciousness, but none of them actually solve the core mystery. We can describe what the brain does, but we still don't know why it creates experience. And honestly, that's kind of terrifying. We might be looking at this problem all wrong. Maybe we need a totally new scientific revolution, something as radical as quantum physics was for classical science. Or maybe, just maybe, some things about consciousness are beyond human understanding. Either way, the hard problem remains hard. And the more we learn, the weirder it gets. Alright, so at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, but why haven't scientists figured this out yet? I mean, we've landed on the moon, we've split the atom, we've built AI that can outthink humans in a bunch of ways. But when it comes to understanding our own minds, we're basically cavemen scratching our heads. So why is consciousness such a nightmare for science? Let's break it down. 1. Science deals with the objective. Consciousness is subjective. Science is amazing at explaining the physical world, things we can measure, observe, and test. We can study brain waves, track neurons firing, and even predict behavior based on brain activity. But consciousness isn't just brain activity. It's the feeling of being alive, of experiencing the world. End of the problem. That's a first-person thing. Science, by design, works from a third-person perspective. It looks at things from the outside. Consciousness, on the other hand, is something you can only know from the inside. It's like trying to explain the taste of chocolate to someone who's never had it. You can talk about its chemical composition, its molecular structure, even the way it activates taste buds. But none of that actually tells you what chocolate tastes like. 2. There's no way to measure it. Science loves data. The whole method is built on measuring things: speed, mass, energy, temperature. If you can measure it, you can study it. But how do you measure consciousness? You can't put awareness in a test tube. You can't weigh a thought. You can track electrical signals in the brain, but that doesn't tell you what someone is actually experiencing. We know that certain brain regions are active when people feel happy or sad, but that's just correlation, not explanation. Imagine someone builds a perfect model of a storm, wind speeds, pressure changes, lightning discharges, but that model will never actually be a storm. That's the situation we're in with consciousness. 3. The brain studying itself is a problem. This one's kind of funny. Our brains are trying to study our brains. We're like a flashlight trying to shine light on itself. Consciousness is what we use to study everything else. But when we turn it inward, it gets slippery. It's like asking a fish to explain water. It's so fundamental to our experience that we struggle to step outside it and see it clearly. 4. If consciousness is special, it breaks science's rules. Science is based on physical laws. Everything we've discovered so far, gravity, electromagnetism, chemistry, follows these laws. But if consciousness isn't just a byproduct of brain activity, that means there's something going on beyond our current scientific understanding. And that's a big deal. If consciousness is fundamental, like space and time, then we might need a completely new framework to explain it. Some people even think quantum physics might play a role in consciousness, but right now that's just speculation. So, are we stuck? Kind of, at least for now. Scientists are making progress in understanding how the brain works, but the hard problem of consciousness, the why of experience, is still wide open. Does that mean we'll never solve it? Not necessarily. Science has cracked mysteries before. People once thought life itself was some magical, unexplainable force, and then we discovered DNA. Maybe one day we'll have a breakthrough that makes consciousness finally make sense. Or maybe, just maybe, it's something we'll never fully understand. So, if consciousness is such a pain to explain, what's next? Are we just stuck forever, doomed to scratch our heads while we wonder why we feel things instead of just running on autopilot like super smart meat robots? Maybe. But there are a few interesting directions people are exploring. 1. Maybe we need a whole new science. Right now, we're trying to explain consciousness using the same scientific methods we use for studying everything else: biology, chemistry, physics. But what if that's the wrong approach? What if consciousness is just different? Some scientists and philosophers think we might need a total shift in how we study the mind. Like how quantum physics totally flipped our understanding of reality 100 years ago. We might be missing some huge piece of the puzzle that changes everything. For example, what if consciousness isn't something the brain produces, but something it taps into, like a radio picking up a signal? That sounds crazy, but honestly, it's no crazier than anything else we've talked about. 2. More interdisciplinary research. Right now, you've got neuroscientists, philosophers, AI researchers, and quantum physicists all working on different parts of the consciousness puzzle. But what if the answer only comes when they actually start working together? Some theories suggest quantum mechanics might have something to do with consciousness, which would be wild. Others think AI might help us crack the mystery by forcing us to define what experience actually is, because if we build a super smart AI and it suddenly starts claiming to feel things, what do we do with that? We need all hands on deck for this one. 3. AI and machine consciousness. Could we build it? This is where things get really weird. Right now, AI can mimic human speech, write essays, and even create art. But is it conscious? Almost definitely not. But what if one day we build a machine that claims it is? That it has feelings, emotions, inner world? Would we believe it? Would it be real? Or just a very convincing simulation? The AI question forces us to define what consciousness actually is, and that might push science towards some real answers. 4. Maybe some things will always be a mystery. Here's the uncomfortable possibility. What if the hard problem of consciousness is unsolvable? What if we're just biologically incapable of understanding it? Think about it, dogs will never understand calculus. No matter how smart they are, their brains just aren't built for it. What if consciousness is like that for us? What if we're just not wired to figure it out? That's a frustrating thought, but it's one we have to consider. Alright, so after all this, where does that leave us? Will science ever crack the hard problem of consciousness? Or are we just chasing our own tails, trying to explain something that's unexplainable? The truth is, nobody knows. There's a real chance we're missing something huge, some unknown law of the universe that makes consciousness make sense. Or maybe we're just not smart enough to figure it out, like ants trying to understand the internet. But here's what we do know: whatever consciousness is, it's the thing that makes life feel real. Without it, the universe might as well just be a bunch of moving atoms. So even if we never figure it out, The fact that we're aware enough to ask these questions, that's pretty damn cool. And hey, if you're into mind-bending questions like this, you should definitely check out some of my other videos. Whether it's AI, the future of human intelligence, or the weirdest theories in science, I got plenty more brain-melting topics to dive into. So hit that next video, and let's keep questioning reality together. Because honestly, the deeper we go, the weirder it gets.